The first thing I saw when I opened my eyes wasn't my mother's face. It was the ceiling. White, flat, the kind of white that hospitals use because it doesn't ask anything of you. The second thing I noticed was the sound, a steady beep, from a machine to my left. Patient and indifferent, keeping time the way nobody in my life ever had. The third thing I noticed was that the chair beside my bed was empty. A nurse came in while I was still trying to process that. Scrubs the color of a storm. Dark eyes. Hair pulled back with a pen still tucked into it like she'd been interrupted mid-thought. She introduced herself as Priya. She checked my IV, adjusted a monitor, and spoke to me in the measured tone of someone trained to deliver hard news gently. "You had emergency surgery," she said. "Ruptured ovarian cyst, complicated by what looks like prolonged physical exhaustion. You're stable. You've been unconscious for about 14 hours. I heard all of it. I understood all of it." What I kept coming back to was the chair. "My family?" I said. My voice came out strange, scraped clean, like something had taken a wire brush to it. Priya's expression didn't change, but her hands slowed just slightly on the IV line. "They were here," she said. "For about 30 minutes, around 2 this morning. It was just after noon." I stared at the empty chair. "Did they leave a number?" She hesitated the way people hesitate when the truth is unkind but unavoidable. "Your mother said you had her cell." She also asked about the insurance billing process before she left. The billing process. I closed my eyes and lay there in the white room with the machine that kept my time. And I thought, of course she did. My name is Nora. I'm 29 years old. I work as a child welfare caseworker for the county of Multnomah in Portland, Oregon, which means I spend my days walking into houses where things have gone wrong and trying to make them less wrong before they become catastrophic. I assess risk. I navigate between what people are saying and what the evidence shows. I write reports that determine whether children go home or don't. It is not a job that allows you to fall apart at inconvenient moments. You learn, after enough years, to keep your voice level when everything around you is anything but. My family had been using that voice against me for years without knowing it. I was calm, so they assumed I was fine. I was quiet, so they assumed I agreed. I kept solving their problems, so they assumed I always would. My brother's name is Caden. He's 25, and he plays bass in a band that has been on the verge of their big break for approximately 7 years. My mother tells anyone who will listen that he has a gift. She says it the way people say it about things they've decided to protect from reality. Carefully, with a kind of reverence that shuts down argument. Caden has a gift. Therefore, Caden needs support. Therefore, Caden's needs come first. Our father died when I was 19 and Caden was 15. A heart attack in the garage on a Tuesday evening. So sudden and so ordinary that none of us knew how to make it fit into the shape of our lives. My mother fell apart for 2 years, which I understood. What I did not understand was that she never really put herself back together. She just redistributed the weight onto whoever was standing closest, and I was always the one standing closest. It started small. Rent when she got behind. Groceries when the numbers didn't work. Caden's guitar, then his amp, then his recording sessions with a producer who never actually produced anything. Car repairs, medical co-pays, one credit card debt that my mother described as a temporary situation for 3 consecutive years. I kept a spreadsheet because that's the kind of person I am. I am a person who documents things. When I added it all up last spring, sitting at my kitchen table at midnight with a cup of cold coffee and the particular exhaustion that lives behind your eyes, the number was $84,000, over 6 years, transferred quietly, asked for constantly, never returned. I didn't tell anyone. I'm not sure why. Maybe because the caseworker part of my brain had assessed the situation and concluded that naming it would cause more damage than continuing to manage it. Maybe because I'd been told so many times that I was strong, that I was the capable one, that some part of me had started to believe that meant I wasn't allowed to be tired. I was tired. I had been tired for years. But the body keeps its own records. 3 weeks before I ended up in that hospital room, I started having pain that I explained away as stress. Sharp, intermittent, the kind you learn to breathe through when you've trained yourself not to stop. I didn't eat enough. I didn't sleep enough. I worked a caseload that was technically 40 hours and practically 60 because the children didn't stop needing things at 5 o'clock on a Friday. I drove between visits and wrote reports at red lights and answered calls during the 10 minutes I'd set aside for lunch. On a Wednesday evening, I was on my way to a home visit when the pain stopped being something I could breathe through. I remember pulling over. I remember putting my hazards on. I remember thinking, I'll just wait for it to pass, the way I had waited for everything else to pass. And then I don't remember anything until the ceiling and the beeping and Priya's careful face. The surgery was 2 hours. The rupture had been bleeding internally for longer than that. The doctor who came in that afternoon used the word lucky in a tone that suggested he meant the opposite. That what he actually meant was close. Much closer than you should have let it get. I lay in the hospital bed for the rest of that day and into the evening, and I thought about the $84,000. I thought about Caden's recording sessions and my mother's credit card and all the times I'd said yes when my body was saying no. I thought about the way my mother described family. You do for the people you love. She said it so often it had started to sound like a rule, like something carved into stone, like the corollary that the people you love should do for you didn't apply. Priya came back around 9 to check my vitals, and I asked the question that had been sitting at the back of my mouth all day. Has anyone come by this evening? She checked the monitor before answering. She had a habit of doing things with her hands when she was buying time to choose her words. Not from your family, she said. I looked at her. There's been a man, she said. He arrived about an hour after your family left this morning. He didn't ask to come in. He sat in the waiting area for 4 hours, then came back this evening. He's down the hall. I frowned. Who is he? She glanced toward the door. He gave his name at the desk. Daniel Mercer. He said he was a family friend. But nobody from your family mentioned him. The name didn't land anywhere I expected it to. I turned it over. Daniel Mercer. It didn't connect to anything in the present. But somewhere deep, in a layer of memory I hadn't visited in a long time, something shifted, like a door in a house you'd thought was locked, moving slightly in a draft. I don't know him, I said. But I wasn't entirely sure that was true. He came back the next morning. I didn't see him at first. Priya mentioned it while she was taking my blood pressure, the way you mention weather, casually, as a piece of information rather than an event. He's back, she said. He brought flowers and left them at the desk. Didn't want to disturb you. I stared at the ceiling for a long time after she said that. My mother called at 11. Her voice had the texture of someone performing concern for an audience that wasn't there. Brisk and warm in equal measure. The way she sounded when she wanted something but hadn't decided yet to ask for it directly. How are you feeling, sweetheart? It wasn't a question. I'm out of surgery, I said. Still in the hospital. The doctor said you'd be fine, she said. We would have stayed, but Caden's showcase was last night. You know how long we've been waiting for this. She paused, for what I recognized as the space she left for me to say, I understand. I didn't fill it. The silence stretched. Nora, she said. Where did you go, Mom? Miami, she said. We've been planning this for months. You know that. I know, I said. I just wanted to hear you say it. Another pause. Priya came in to adjust something on my IV, and I watched her move around the room, quiet and efficient, like someone who'd learned that most of the noise in a hospital is better left undisturbed. We'll be back Thursday, my mother said. We'll come straight to the hospital. That's fine, I said. You sound strange. I had surgery, Mom. I almost bled out in my car. The doctor said you were stable. He said I was lucky, I told her. There's a difference. She made a soft sound, the one she made when she felt accused of something she intended to reframe. You've always been so hard on yourself, she said. That's why this happened. You pushed too hard. I held the phone against my ear and thought, she's going to make this about my personality. She was going to take the fact that I nearly died from exhaustion and 6 years of doing too much for people who ask too much, and she was going to locate the problem inside me. I'll talk to you Thursday, I said. She started to say something else. I hung up. That afternoon, I asked Priya to tell Daniel Mercer he could come in if he wanted. He appeared in the doorway 10 minutes later, tall, somewhere in his late 50s, with the kind of stillness that people get when they've been through enough that they've stopped wasting energy on anything that doesn't matter. His hair was gray at the temples. His eyes were dark and careful, and when they landed on me, they stayed, the way you look at something you've been worried about. He didn't say hello. He said, "You look like him." I looked at him. "Like who? Your father?" he said. Around the eyes. He always had eyes, like he knew what you were going to say before you said it. My chest did something that wasn't quite pain. "Who are you?" I asked. He came into the room slowly, like he wasn't sure he'd been fully invited. He sat in the chair beside the bed, the empty chair, and he put his hands on his knees, and he looked at me with an expression I didn't have a word for yet. "I'm your father's brother," he said. "Your uncle. We've never met." I stared at him. "Your mother made sure of that," he said. "After your father died, there were things she didn't want complicated." I tried to reach out. She made it clear I wasn't welcome. I respected that because I didn't want to make things harder for you and Caden, but I kept track of you. Not in a strange way. I needed to know you were okay. I kept tracking of you. The simplicity of it hit me somewhere I hadn't expected. "How did you know I was here?" I asked. He looked at his hands. "I have a friend who works at your county office. When you didn't show up for 2 days with no call out, she got worried. She made some calls." His jaw tightened. "I got on a plane. He got on a plane. My mother was in Miami watching my brother play bass." I looked at this man I had never met, this person who shared my father's last name and apparently his eyes, sitting in the chair that my mother had not sat in for more than 30 minutes, and I felt something I hadn't expected to feel. Not warmth yet, not trust. Something rawer than that. The specific ache of recognizing something you didn't know you'd been missing. "Why didn't you fight harder?" I asked. "When she cut you off, you could have gone to court." He nodded slowly. I thought about it. "But a court fight over access to grieving children, I didn't want that to be your memory of the year after your father died." His voice was quiet. "I thought your mother would come around. I misjudged her. I thought about the $84,000, about Caden's amp and my mother's credit card, and the way she said, 'You'll figure it out,' with a confidence that came from never having had to figure anything out herself. She's very good at making people think she'll come around," I said. He nodded again. "Once." He didn't say anything else. He didn't need to. He visited twice a day for the next 3 days. He didn't push. He didn't ask for anything. He brought bad hospital coffee and sometimes a book he was reading, and we talked, carefully at first, and then less carefully, about my father, about what he'd been like as a young man, stubborn and funny and loyal to a fault, about the way he used to fix things around the house, not because he knew what he was doing, but because he couldn't stand the idea of asking for help. I recognized that. I recognized it in myself, which meant my mother had not put it there. It had come from somewhere older. On the second evening, Daniel mentioned something quietly, the way he mentioned most things. "Your billing office called me," he said. "I hope that's all right." I gave them my card. I looked at him. "Let me," he said. "Please." "I don't know you," I said. "And I appreciate this, but I don't want—" "I know," he said. "I'm not trying to buy anything. He paused. "I wasn't here for 10 years. I can't give you that back. But I can do this." I looked at the ceiling, the white ceiling that didn't ask anything of you. "Okay," I said. My mother arrived on Thursday morning. I heard her before I saw her, her voice in the hallway, carrying the specific frequency of someone who had decided in advance that everything was handled, that her presence would resolve whatever loose ends had accumulated in her absence. She was dressed well, tan from the Miami sun, her hair done. She looked like someone returning from vacation, which was because she was. She swept into the room with Caden behind her. He was wearing sunglasses on top of his head and carrying a paper coffee cup, and he looked at me with the expression he always used when he was somewhere he'd rather not be, politely uncomfortable, like visiting a hospital was a thing that happened to him rather than something he was choosing. "There you are," my mother said, the same way she'd said it on the phone, as if I'd been hiding. "Here I am," I said. She kissed my forehead, which she hadn't done since I was small, and I understood that the performance was for Caden, or for herself, or for some invisible audience she carried everywhere. She looked around the room and her gaze landed on the chair where Daniel had been sitting, on the book he'd left, on the small vase of flowers that Priya had brought in from the desk. You had visitors, she said. My mother has a particular tone for statements she wants to be questions without the vulnerability of asking. I've spent my entire career learning to recognize that tone in other people's mothers. It's harder to identify in your own. My uncle came, I said. The word uncle landed visibly. Her expression didn't collapse, it compressed. She turned toward me slowly, the way you turn toward something you've been hoping won't materialize. I told you about him, I said. He called twice after Dad died. You told me he was a troublemaker and we didn't need that kind of drama. She straightened. He has no business being here. He flew in from Seattle, I said. He's been here every day. He sat outside my room the first night because he didn't want to overstep. Mom, Caden said. He was looking at her with the expression he got when he sensed a scene forming that might somehow inconvenience him. She ignored him. She looked at me with the face she used when she was deciding how to manage something. Where is he now? Getting coffee, I said. She set her bag down on the chair with a deliberate kind of emphasis, the gesture of a person establishing territory. Nora, she said, you're recovering. You don't need someone you don't know around you right now. I don't know him because you made sure I didn't, I said. Her jaw tightened. That was a decision I made for this family. For yourself, I said. My voice had gone to the level place. The caseworker place. The place I went when I needed to stay in the conversation without letting the conversation get inside me. You made it for yourself, the same way you made the decision to go to Miami. I was supporting your brother, she said. He needed us there. I needed you here. She pulled in a breath. The doctor said, I know what the doctor said, I told her. I was there. I heard the word lucky and I heard the word close, and I knew what they meant. I also know you left 30 minutes after I came out of surgery to catch a flight. Caden shifted. He looked at his coffee cup. We paid for the flight months ago, my mother said. These things don't just refund. $84,000, I said. She blinked. That's what I've sent you over 6 years. I kept the records. Every transfer, every copay I covered, every month Caden's rent came out of my account because he was between gigs. I said the number slowly. $84,000. My mother's face went through several things quickly. Calculation was the one that settled. Nora, that was family. I'm family too, I said. When was the last time you asked how I was before you asked me for something? Caden looked up. He had the grace to look uncomfortable, which surprised me slightly. I hadn't expected that from him. You're being dramatic, my mother said, and her voice had gone cool now. The warmth lifted like a curtain pulled back to show what was underneath. You've always done this. You act like everything is a crisis. I had emergency surgery, I said. This one actually was. She stepped forward, lowering her voice the way she did when she wanted to pretend we weren't having the conversation we were having. Listen to me. You let some stranger in here, some man you've never met, who God knows what he wants from you. He wants to know me, I said. He knew my father. She stopped. He told me things about Dad I didn't know, I said. Things you never told me, and I'd like to know more. Something moved across her face. Not guilt exactly. Closer to exposure. The expression of someone who has managed a particular story for a long time and can see the edges beginning to fray. Your father's family was complicated, she said. He wasn't complicated, I said. You cut him off because he was named in Dad's will and you didn't want to deal with it, Daniel told me. He said he settled for less than he was legally entitled to because he didn't want to put us through a fight. He walked away so we wouldn't have to watch. You don't know what you're talking about, she said. But her voice had lost its footing. I know enough, I said. I'm a caseworker, Mom. I interview people for a living. I know the difference between someone with an agenda and someone who drove across a state and sat outside a glass door because they were worried about a niece they'd never met. The door opened. Daniel came in, 2 coffees in hand, and he stopped when he saw my mother. He looked at her with an expression that wasn't hostile. It was just steady, the look of a person who has decided not to be the problem. My mother turned on him. You have no right to be here, she said. He set the coffees down on the side table. His voice was quiet. She invited me. I'm her mother. Yes, he said. You are. He looked at her without flinching. And I'm her father's brother. And I was here when you weren't. That landed. I watched it land on my mother the same way a sentence lands when it's simply, unarguably true. Caden set down his coffee cup. He looked at me for a long moment. "I'm sorry," he said. His voice was quiet. Younger than usual. He said it to me directly, not to the room. "I'm sorry I didn't stay." It was the most honest thing I'd heard from him in years. I didn't know what to do with it yet, but I kept it. My mother pulled herself back together. She was good at that, the rapid reassembly, the return to surface. She looked at me and straightened. "We can talk about all of this when you're better, when you're thinking clearly." "I'm thinking more clearly than I have in 6 years, I said. She reached for her bag. "The accounts?" I said. "The joint one you have access to." She stopped. "I called the bank 2 days ago," I said. "Priya brought me my phone. The account is closed. The automatic transfers are stopped." Her face went white in a way that had nothing to do with shock and everything to do with arithmetic. "Nora," she said. "And the emergency contact," I said. "I changed it. You're no longer on my medical paperwork. You don't have access to my records or my decisions." "You can't," she said. "I already did. Proper forms. Hospital administrator. Daniel is listed now." She stared at him. He looked back at her without triumph. Just presence. Just the calm of someone who had waited a long time for something and wasn't going to make a show of it now that it had arrived. "You're making a mistake," my mother said. Her voice was harder now, the warmth completely gone, which was in some ways a relief. "At least this was the real version. Everything you have you built with this family's support." "I built it in spite of this family," I said. "I built it after night shifts and 12-hour days and visits to houses where children were being failed by the people who were supposed to protect them. I know what that looks like up close." She flinched. "And I know what I've been doing," I said. "I've been failing myself the same way. Deciding that everyone else's need was more urgent than mine. Working until I broke. And when I broke, you were in Miami." She stood very still. My mother was many things, but she was not stupid. She knew when a room had turned. She knew when the story she'd been telling had reached the audience that wouldn't receive it the way she'd intended. She picked up her bag. She looked at me one more time. "I hope you know what you're doing," she said. "Finally," I told her. "I do." She left. Her heels on the hospital floor, sharp and diminishing, and then the turn at the hallway, and then nothing. Caden stood by the door. He looked at Daniel and then back at me. His face was doing something complicated. He was 25, and he had been given everything by our mother, and none of it had required him to think too carefully about where it came from. I didn't hate him for that. He was a product of choices I hadn't made and couldn't unmake. But he wasn't off the hook either. "I need some time," I told him. "Before we talk." He nodded. He looked like he wanted to say more and decided against it. That was probably the right call. He left. The room went quiet. Daniel sat back down in the chair. He picked up his coffee. He didn't say anything, and neither did I for a while, and the machine kept up its steady beeping, and outside the window, the Portland afternoon was gray and ordinary, and the trees were doing what trees do in October, which is let go of things without making a spectacle of it. I was discharged 6 days later. My own timeline, the way I decided it would be, Priya walked me out and hugged me briefly at the door. The kind of hug that comes from 4 days of taking care of someone and meaning it. She had slipped a piece of paper into my hand the day before with the number for a therapist she trusted, and the note, "For when you're ready to figure out why you waited so long." I kept it. Daniel drove me home. We didn't talk much in the car, but it wasn't the silence of people who have nothing to say. It was the silence of people who have figured out that they don't need to fill every space. He helped me get my bag to the apartment door and then stood on the steps with his hands in his pockets in the gray afternoon light. "I don't want to crowd you," he said. "You've been through a lot in the last 2 weeks. Take whatever time you need. I want to know more about my dad," I said. "The things you know." His voice. What he laughed at. What he was like before he had kids. Daniel's expression did something I could only describe as relief. Like a muscle that had been held too long finally released. "I'll tell you everything I know," he said. I nodded. I looked at the street. The ordinary street, with the ordinary houses and the ordinary afternoon moving through it like it didn't know what had just shifted. "Can I ask you something?" I said. "Anything. Did you know? About the money? How much I was sending them? He was quiet for a moment. I suspected, he said. I heard things here and there. I wanted to say something sooner, but I wasn't sure you'd hear it from someone you didn't trust yet. I thought about that. Would I have listened? 6 months ago, before the hospital. I was honest enough to admit, probably not. Probably I would have explained it away. Said it was complicated. Said it was family. It is family, I thought now. That's the problem. We use the word like it means something fixed, like it's a category that changes the rules of what's acceptable. My mother used it that way. You do for family. Family first. As if the word itself was a reason, not just a relationship. I'd spent 6 years trying to earn my place in that definition, working overtime on a salary I couldn't afford to decimate, sending money I needed, giving time I was running out of, all so I could pass some test I'd never been told the criteria for. And when I needed the word to mean something when I was in a hospital bed after emergency surgery with machines monitoring my heart, the chair was empty. The chair was empty, and a man I'd never met drove from Seattle and sat outside my door. Family is the people who show up, I thought. My mother had said that phrase to me more than once, usually when she was explaining why we owed something to someone, usually when she was making the case for doing more than I thought we could manage. She'd said it like a principle, a law of nature. She wasn't wrong. She just hadn't understood that the principle applied to me, too. 3 weeks after discharge, I was back at work half days. I sat across the table from a woman whose daughter I'd been monitoring for 6 months. A woman who was trying very hard and not always succeeding, and I listened to her describe the gap between the parent she wanted to be and the parent she currently was. I do everything I can, she said. I just don't have enough left. Her voice broke on the word enough. I know, I told her. And I meant it differently than I would have 4 weeks ago. I know. I still had voicemails from my mother I hadn't listened to. I would, eventually. I knew Caden and I had a conversation ahead of us that would be long and uneven, and probably several conversations spread over a long time. I didn't know what the shape of any of it would be. I had stopped pretending I could manage outcomes in advance. What I knew, the transfers were stopped. The account was closed. My emergency contact was a man I'd known for 3 weeks, who had more claim to being my family than anyone who shared my last name. What I knew, I was a person who had spent 6 years holding strangers together across a phone line while my own foundation was cracking. I was good at my job. I was not, it turned out, so good at applying those same skills inward. That was a new project. I'd added it to my list. What I knew. There is a specific kind of grief that comes with recognizing you were not protected by the people who were supposed to protect you. It doesn't feel like anger, though it looks like anger from the outside. It feels more like an adjustment, like your body recalibrating to a truth it always knew, and finally, at great cost, stopped pretending otherwise. I drove home on a Tuesday evening in November, and the streetlights were coming on in the early dark, and the city was doing what cities do, moving forward without waiting for anyone in particular. I sat in my car in front of my apartment for a little while, not from exhaustion this time, not because I was delaying, just because it was quiet and the quiet felt different now, less like absence, more like room. I had 84,000 reasons to be angry. I decided to use the energy for something else. I went inside. I made dinner. I ate it sitting at my kitchen table, the same table where I'd added up 6 years of transfers, but this time I opened my phone and called Daniel. He picked up on the second ring. I could hear the television in the background, and then the sound of it being muted, which was a small thing but not a small thing. "Tell me a story about my dad," I said. He laughed, a warm, tired sound. "I've been waiting for that," he said. And he did. He told me about the man my father had been before he became my father, before the mortgage and the Tuesday garage and the quiet that fell over everything after. He talked for an hour while the November wind moved through the street outside my window, and I listened the way you listen when you understand that you're being given something you can't get back but can, from here forward, keep. That was the night I stopped grieving the family I'd tried so hard to be enough for and started paying attention to the one that had driven through the dark to find me.